Good afternoon and welcome to today's session of The Edge of the Future of Work. A special welcome to those of you who are visitors to AMP, members of the board and media, and of course staff and those on the live stream. My name is Goldie Markovitz and I work in AMP Capital's real estate team, where we spend every day creating the physical spaces where you will work in the future. So I'm very excited to be a part of this session today. Chris and Heather are going to explore positive ways in which we will build our skills and learn in this new way of working. Throughout the session, you can join in the conversation. We're on Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook with a hashtag Amplify 2017. To introduce this session, I'd like to extend a warm welcome to Tony Jackson of SAP Fieldglass. Tony has founded SAP Fieldglass in 2010, and as the director of the Asia Pacific region, she works with corporations to build best-in-class external procurement solutions. Welcome, Tony.
Thank you, Goldie. I'm very excited to be a sponsor for AMP, especially around today, which is all about the future of work. SAP Fieldglass is also a partner of AMP, where we provide software to manage the external workforce for AMP, so we're very excited. I'd like to introduce Heather McGowan and Chris Shipley from Work to Learn. And just to give you a little tidbit about both of them, Heather secretly sees herself as a 5-year-old. So she's very young at heart, very passionate about what she does. Heather tells me that Chris is unflappable. So we'd like to put a challenge out there to the audience to see if we can fluster her throughout the session today. So thank you very much for this opportunity, and over to Heather and Chris. Thank you.
You really don't want to question my flappability, because if it goes off, it could be really ugly. Well, good afternoon. First, I want to say that Ruben, if you're in the room, or if you're listening from wherever you are, what an amazing job of curation you've done. I've been listening to a lot of the talks, and Sue did this amazing job of connecting them all into her talk, and I think it flows really well into what we wanted to share with you today. So just a terrific job to Ruben and the AMP staff for curating all of these conversations. I think we also want to give credit to AMP for curating our relationship. It was in this room 2 years ago that Heather gave a talk, I gave a talk, and after she spoke, I walked over and said, "You've just described my life. This sort of unbundling of work and jobs that are non-traditional, that is completely who I am." And so we went out and had a drink, and then we found out that we were living 6 miles apart, but here we met in Sydney. We were both living in Boston. And so we had more drinks back there, and over the course of a lot of drinks, we realized that we were working on a lot of the same questions about what does the future mean when work is non-traditional, when work as we know it goes away. So we want to share some of those ideas and thoughts with you today. Ruben also encouraged us to build some exercise into these sessions. And many of you maybe either haven't had lunch yet, so you're getting tired, or you have had lunch and so you are tired. And so I'm going to ask you to start, and we're just going to take 30 seconds each, but I want you to turn to the person next to you, or find someone next to you, and I want you to imagine that they have the job that you most want. You have dreamed about this job all your life, and this person has the power to get you that interview. So I want you to turn to them and introduce yourself, but don't tell them what your current job role or title is. Don't tell them where you went to uni. Don't talk about the companies you've worked for or your past and present experience, but explain to this person, again with the goal of getting the interview, why you'd be perfect for that job. Just take 30 seconds right now to make that introduction. Go ahead. The danger of this exercise, of course, is that you start to get very engaged with each other and you forget that you have to pay attention to us. So I'm going to ask you to bring your attention back to the stage because we really are fabulous. Can I get your attention again?
Hey!
Thank you.
Right. That's the 5-year-old. This is the unflappable one. All right. I want you to think about that. Was that an easy exercise to do? Was it easy to talk about yourself without talking about your work? It's challenging, isn't it? And it's challenging because we start our lives really pushing ourselves toward careers. We ask little kids, what do you want to be when you grow up? And imagine what their future might look like. We ask ourselves when we go to university, what do you want to major in? And in fact, now in the States, often you declare your major before you even apply to the school. And then we ask when we go to our cocktail parties and we meet each other in social settings, we say, so what do you do? And these are the kinds of questions that really formulate our identity as workers and our relationship to our work and to our job. They're really difficult questions right now because what do I want to be when I grow up? When half of the work that exists today won't exist then, and 65% of the work that will exist is still to be imagined. What do you want to major in when very few of us actually are working in the field of our academic major? And what do you do when a typical worker today will work in 17 different jobs across 5 different industries? It will be very rare to have one job for a long arc of your career. The key here is that life is changing pretty quickly. We heard Sue talk about that. We're going to share some more thoughts on that. And it's all going to make us very uncomfortable. Change is nothing that we enjoy, and we have to get comfortable being uncomfortable. Seth Godin in his book Tribes talks about managers managing process. And today, much of the automated work is all process. Leaders, he says, they will lead through change. And here's what we think, it's all change now. So all of us are going to have to find ways in which we can become leaders regardless of where we are in our careers.
So there are a couple of zones we can think about. So if you were able to answer that question, what do you do, and where you went to university, et cetera, you'd be in your comfort zone, because you'd be given an answer you've always given. If you didn't have that answer for some reason, you weren't in a job, you might be in this zone. And between the comfort zone and the panic zone is a very important zone we don't spend enough time in, the learning zone. The learning zone is something we think of as something we do in the first portion of our lives. So if you're living a life like this, things are very comfortable, you're not changing very much, I fear you may have this situation in your future. And although the zones are articulated as these clear circles, the reality is you can't live in the panic zone. Nothing gets done in the panic zone. You can't really live in the learning zone either, because it's like lifting weights. When you lift weights, you're tearing muscle in order for it to reform. So you've got to vacillate between the comfort zone and the learning zone. And you extend yourself into the learning zone to acquire new skills. You go back to the comfort zone to rest and reflect and make sense of those skills that you've acquired. So why is this going on? So in the world of managing process, our lives existed in these 3 discrete bands. You were educated, you had a career, and you retired. So you learned something, perhaps you went to university. You did that thing, you stepped on the escalator in a job or in an industry that you wrote up. You retired, and then you died a year or 2 later. The model was built that way. It was designed to give you 18 months of financial security, because that's really all you needed. And along the way, you focused on university on that. What do you want to be? What's your major? And what do you do? Because you acquired a skill or an expertise that became your set identity that brought you right up that escalator. Now we think it's looking more like this. Your life expectancy is further out. Right now in Australia, it's 83, but it's going to be 90 before we know it. Education, career, and retire become learning, leveraging, and longevity. The career escalator is broken into a series of fragmented steps, and we're going to have to learn and leverage in quick succession. We're going to have to remain engaged because none of us can afford, or many of us cannot afford, a 30, 40-year career of retirement. And instead of acquiring a set expertise, we're going to focus on adaptability, portable skills, and learning agility. We're going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So if this is the reality, well, we took the old economy mindset of managing process, and we took learning out. We'd get to our first engagement, and then we'd be in the panic zone. And I think this is happening to a lot of professionals today. If your industry changed and you lost your job, but you've always been an X, what are you if you're not that X anymore? If you're not that accountant or that marketing person or whatever it may be? How do you define yourself? How do you reinvent yourself? This is work by the Foundation for Young Australians. If you haven't read it, the report is called The New Growth Mindset. And they said a professional today will have 16 or 17 different jobs across 5 different industries. And it won't be a series of channels. They focus very much on the portability of those skills. And we think that you should too. So now we have a little exercise for you.
Yeah, so stand up.
Yeah.
If you are working in the field of your undergraduate major, this is what you're doing today is what you studied in university. All right, it's
Wow.
excellent. Okay. And now stand up or stay standing. You need to give me the clue here. If you have stayed your entire career in this industry, so where you studied for and your whole career has been where you are. All right, and then those of you who are still standing, keep standing if you've been in this field for 10 years or more. So you all represent an ability to stay adaptable within an industry that's changing, and you are really a rarity in the world going forward.
You're not normal.
So go ahead and sit down. You're lovely people, but not what the norm will be going forward.
We expect if we do this workshop, or we do this, this keynote, 5, 10 years from now, we'd be hard-pressed to find a person to stand up. Now raise your hand if you didn't stand at all. You're the new normal. So what does this mean? So if we look at, you guys are in AMP, I'm going to broadly call it the finance or the banking industry. Right now we have 4 generations in the workforce, which is the most we've ever had. 4 generations with different contextual references, different cultural identities. And if you asked each one of those people, what does banking mean, or what does financing mean? If you just look for a second at all the things it's meant, I point this at. What do I point this at? It doesn't seem to be clicking. Oh, there it goes.
There you go.
Okay. So if you look at all the different mental models, for some people, finance or banking is a building. For some people, it's a relationship. For some people, it's a virtual currency. For some people, it's an algorithm. Our mental models are shifting. What does driving mean if your hands aren't going to be on the wheel at some point? We have to think about how much our mental models and our contextual references are changing in our lifetime. So on that note, if we take a longer arc view of this velocity of change we're in, life expectancy is getting a lot longer. Particularly in our generation, we're seeing huge leaps in longevity. At the same time, we're seeing huge leaps in change. So we're moving to an accelerated rate of change at a time we're living longer. And what does that mean? In the past, you had one paradigm shift had multiple generations to absorb it. So when the steam engine came along, it was 2.5 generations that had time to adapt to that change. And now, a single lifetime will include 4 or 5 different paradigm shifts. That's a lot of change we're going to have to get used to. And we're starting to feel this. The Earth's spinning a little bit faster, I'd say. We're also entering a new era. We have 5 eras that we've identified, and they're identified by our relationship to talent and tools. Each era is collapsing in about by 10 in terms of time, so they're coming more quickly. And where we used to, looking at the information era, for example, this is the one we're coming out of, it was about acquiring a set expertise. It was about acquiring specific skills that you could use for a lifetime. Now we're moving into the augmented era, where it's about creativity, agility, and adaptability. Our relationship with tools are changing too. So it used to be that you could use a tool if you learned to use that tool. So you learn to use a software package. Now we're going to be learning from and with the tools. So the tools is going to be interacting with us in a different way. And I think you've probably heard that from some other speakers. The challenging thing right now is in time, we're moving between the information and the augmented era, but our mental models are stuck between the industrial era and the information era. The way our school systems are designed, the way our organizations are set up, how we think about work, this is a big shift we have to make. So machines are getting much smarter. Humans are getting smarter too, but unfortunately we get smarter as a species, not as individuals so much. And humans are being conditioned to act more machine-like. So you have a phone. How many times have you touched your phone today? Have you ever put one of those software packages on there? It tells you how many times you touch your phone. It's alarming. It's frightening. We're slaves to the machines. When your phone buzzes or a field enters on a computer, you respond to it. You answer email, even though it's not the most important thing you're going to do today. At the same time, machines are becoming more human-like. I think a simple example is something like Alexa, where you just speak to it. We're starting to have more natural interactions with machines. And Chris and I believe that we have this inflection window of about a decade before we decide what machines should be doing and what humans should be doing. Because right now we're making humans compete with machines.
So I want you to, you've got phones, I see them here, which is great. You're probably all checking their buzzing. But unlock it right now. Take your password or whatever if you've got a phone. And I don't want you to do this, but I want you just to understand how you feel when I say pass it to your neighbor. Okay? The idea that your phone with all your stuff on it is about to be in somebody else's hands, that's frightening, right? So the other thing I want to ask is, think about now, how many people, if you had your neighbor's phone... You can pass it back
now. You can pass it back.
If you had your neighbor's phone, how many people on your contact list could you call? In other words, what phone numbers do you remember? Can somebody do 5? Call 5 people?
Raise your hand if you can call 10 or more people without a contact list.
Very
You're
impressed.
not normal.
I can call 2 numbers. My childhood phone number, I haven't lived there in 35 years, 40 years, and my own self. I can't even call my mom, my spouse, my family. It's all in that phone, right? And the point here is that we have taken something, our memory, and we've already outsourced it. We've become part robot to this thing that is our phone. And if you think of it, those of you who said, 10 or more, I'm guessing you learned those numbers earlier. If I asked this question, if we rolled back the time and I said 10 years ago, how many people could you before you got your iPhone? Most of us could say, yeah, it's 10 numbers, 15 numbers. I can call people in my office. I can call all my family members. But now that we don't have to do that, we don't. We've lost that bit of memory because we've already outsourced that and become
Part cyborg.
Part cyborg, exactly.
Same with reading maps. I mean, how many people take out a map to figure out where you're going? We've already started doing some of this adaptation. We're not really realizing it. And that vulnerability you felt when you handed your phone over was because you were handing over part of yourself. You might as well rip off your arm and hand it to your neighbor. So when we look at this, the fact that we've started outsourcing a little bit, making you realize that we've already started doing it. Let's look at a job. A job is a collection of tasks. And those collection of tasks can sort of be sorted to what can we do something with, how can we unbundle them? For example, we have operational tasks. So managing your calendar, for example. There's artificial intelligence software that can already do that. That can be a skill that we can offload. There's an art to it in certain instances, but the baseline of it can be automated. That discrete task that if you had one more person to work for you to do it, that you would hand off, that can be done in isolation and be brought back to you, that can be done by Airtasker or Uber or some other function. In the US, 94% of the net new work is in this category. Between 2005 and 2015, 94% of our net new work. Then there's your expertise. We have the ability to collaborate with machines to reach higher potential. So Watson didn't just win Jeopardy. Watson can read MRIs. Watson can analyze legal briefs. The human has to be that last mile to make sense of it, but together with machines, we can reach higher levels. Your portable skills. This is framing what you do in a context that's portable. We're not doing that enough with young people. We're not doing that enough with ourselves. And then the top of the pyramid, I think, is learning agility. That's the ability to learn, unlearn, and relearn. So as technology is taking over more and more of the things we do and allowing us to reach higher and higher levels, we have to think about how we learn and acquire new skills. So we think work's moving in a couple of directions. In this time period, we think is maybe a decade or two. So we're offloading a bunch to atomization. That started happening a lot already in the US. We're also offloading to automation. And we're reaching higher levels with augmentation. The net results of this, based on today's work, the work we have today, is we just don't need as many humans to do things that are routine and predictable. And we think the populist movements we're seeing around the globe are a reaction to this. People are losing their purpose, they're losing their place, and anybody who can stop that from happening is becoming a fairly popular candidate. We're going to need more skilled humans to do things that are complex and ambiguous. This may mean university, this may mean other ways. So education and learning is not just the realm of the academy. We think there are lots of opportunities to learn. So where do we go from here? If you haven't seen the movie, this is a clip from the movie Gravity with Sandra Bullock. There's a moment in which she gets blown off the spacecraft and she's spinning in space. And we feel like a lot of people are feeling this way right now. And they ask her when she's spinning in space, because her headset still has miraculously somehow connected to the command center. They say, what do you see? And she said, well, the Earth is over there and the moon is over there. And they can figure out where she is in space. And we feel like we need those kinds of reference points for people to help define themselves when they're spinning like this. And for us, we refer to Simon Sinek's Start With Why. We think that's a pretty good framework. So he says great companies, all companies can tell you what they do. It's a product or service they sell. Some companies can tell you how, which, the process that makes them special. But really great companies can tell you why they exist. And that's their purpose. And purpose, he thinks, was important because it makes a connection between the outer brain and the reptilian brain and the heart. It makes a deeper gut-level connection with you. He thinks that makes an more enduring relationship with the company. I think there's another reason that's important that maybe wasn't evident when he wrote that TED Talk 5 or 10 years ago, which is, by the way, the third most watched TED Talk ever. So if you haven't seen it, you're probably the only one in this room. So I use Apple as an example. Apple is a beautiful example of defining their purpose. They say in everything we do, we challenge the status quo and we think differently. We challenge the status quo by making technology that's easier to use. We happen to make computers and electronics. If Apple hadn't defined themselves that way and they just said we make great computers, they'd be where Dell is right now. But because they define themselves looking at technology more broadly, with a sense of purpose, they can disrupt a series of industries in succession. I also often use Amazon as an example. If Amazon said we were going to be the world's best online bookseller, they wouldn't have won Academy Awards 4 months ago. Their sense of purpose has allowed them to navigate through 4 or 5 paradigm shifts in just 22 years. So to the individual, whenever Apple comes out with a product, I line up and say, I need it because it's easy to use. But it's really just reflecting who I am. So to the individual, if we call back to the research by the Foundation for Young Australians, the only way we're going to get people to navigate through 16 or 17 different jobs across 5 different industries is if we get them to understand their purpose. What drives them? What excites them? How do they make that purpose productive? And then how do they take that productivity and create real value to sustain themselves? And that's what's going to allow them to navigate. Like a young person coming out of uni today is going to have to go through these 5 different industries in 17 different jobs. How are they going to do that if they focus on just that first what? So we think this was the kind of old economy question. What do you do for a living? And the why and how probably never got covered. We don't know these are the exact right framings of the question, but I think we need to start with why with ourselves. What are we passionate about? What do you care about? How do you make that passion productive? And then how do you direct that passion and productivity against market realities to create value? So we think this why holds the center. So when we ask what we do today, it's a balance of our purpose and passion, our skills and aptitudes weighed against market realities. And those are not fixed things, because as those market realities change,
Eventually. There they are.
the
Or we
battery's
get
dying.
better clickers.
Yeah, is there a better clicker?
Oh.
There it goes.
There you go. Go ahead, just talk it through.
Yeah, okay. So the circles change, and then the center changes as well. So what you do is going to change based upon the shifting market realities and as you add more skills. So we talk about learning, learn to do something at the beginning of your life, and then we say we got to learn more stuff, which may be relearning. The point in the middle that we really have to focus on is this process of unlearning. So if you've ever done a software update using Excel or something like that, and they move that tool from one window to the other, but you keep going back to that old window to look for the tool, you're stuck in the process. You haven't unlearned yet. And there's so much in our world that we're going to have to unlearn. If you haven't seen this, is another TED Talk called the Unbuckle. And the Unbuckle, when you turn the handlebars to the right, the wheel moves to the left. When you turn the handlebars to the left, the wheel moves to the right. It's disorienting. It's also almost impossible to balance if you learned how to ride a regular bike. So if you try to ride a regular bike and then you try to ride the Unbuckle, it takes about 6 months. And then once you learn to ride the Unbuckle, it takes another 6 months to learn to ride the bicycle again. This is the kind of mental process we're going to have to go through to adapt to change.
Yeah, so as an example of unlearning, just think to yourself, it's something you do all the time. Spell your last name.
Just spell it out loud.
Right? S-H-I-P-L-E-Y. That's mine.
M-C-G-O-W-A-N. Go ahead, spell your name out loud.
All right. Now, spell your last name backwards. Right? It's a much heavier cognitive lift, right? Because this is not what we do. It's not automatic for us to do that. And this is the process of unlearning. So having to think and work harder to do something in a different way than you're used to doing it.
So how do you lead the change? This is a set of frameworks that I just came up with 3 days ago, so this is really new. I had a conversation with a woman on the boat in Tasmania to Mona, and she was telling me how she used to run a company. She's incredibly qualified. She'd built a company and sold her company, but then nobody would hire her because she was over a certain age. So she had to buy a company. So she bought a piece of real estate she's developing, and that's going to be her new job. So she had to buy a job. And I started thinking, why? We have this perception in sort of the old economy, which we're still in, of what ages we value. So at 23, you sort of enter the workforce. You start becoming a net positive. 23 to 35, you sort of bump around a little bit. 35 to 45 is your accelerant. 45 to 55 is when you, 50 is when you sort of plateau. 55 to 65, definitely the back nine. People will hire you maybe. And then 70, you die. We have relegated learning to just take place in that first quartile. In relative comfort, you contribute and acquire expertise, and then you retire and die. And if there's any disruption in that contribute period, you're in panic. This is the model I think we're still a little bit stuck in. So we take that same model and say, okay, well, why does that happen? Well, you've got more brain plasticity when you're younger. It's easier for young people to learn languages. They pick up things like a sponge. They can learn and unlearn very quickly. You acquire expertise, usually in an industry. You become more valuable because of that expertise. And then you've got maturity, perspective, and wisdom. And we think the overlap between those two, why you've got high potential at 45 to 55 is you've got a balance between enough acquired expertise and then still enough gas in the tank, so you're going to, contribute something to the company. So this is sort of, you got to believe this model first, and 45 becomes the magic number. Like everybody's looking for a 45-year-old. Then I went and said, okay, well, all these sort of new economy companies, all these big emerging companies we're talking about all the time that are disrupting things, what's their 45-year-old look like? They're digital natives, so we've got sort of a median, these are the actual median ages at these companies. They peak at 31. So if you assume they're not hiring 2-year-olds and you spread it out in either direction, your workforce suddenly looks like this, your new economy workforce. And your value zone is sort of outside your new economy workforce. Does that mean our high value zone is now lower? At the same time, you'll notice on the bottom, 83 is the new life expectancy, not 70, and soon that'll be 90. So as this model is pushing this way, demand is pulling that way. Maybe the arc looks a little different. I'm not saying this is right. This is what I think is happening. And 35 becomes the new 45, just at the same time that 83 becomes the new 70. So if skills demand are pulling that way, and longevity is pulling this way, in Australia, 40 is the median age in your workforce right now. How much of our current workforce is hitting any of those zones? And I think as a result, we have 3 potential panic zones we're not really addressing adequately. One, we're saying everybody has to have a university degree. I don't know that that's true, but the cost is so prohibitive for people. Workforce is changing, so some of those people in the 45 to 50 range at their peak level are becoming unbundled. They're being thrown out of the workforce because their industry changes. There's a potential panic zone there because they've got a loss of identity. And then you're suddenly being pushed out of the workforce at 60 when you're going to live to 80. What are we going to do for the next 20 years? So these are 3 potential panic zones I think we need to think about. So in the old economy where you acquired expertise as you went up the escalator, problems were complicated. They broke down into subcomponents. So by the time you got to the top of the ladder, you had the experience of everybody underneath you because nothing had changed that much. But now, instead of a complicated world, I think it looks more like this. We're in a complex world. And as a result, our decision-making needs to look different if you've got people who've got all sorts of experiences at all levels in your organization and all types of knowledge. So in the world of managing process, in really simple terms, I think we used to, preparation for work is learn something, learn to do something. Then do that thing to produce a unit of value. And that was kind of work. Now I think it looks more like this, or we're entering the era that's going to look like this. You got to learn in order to learn. It's not about learning a thing. It's learning about learning to learn continuously. Learning will become part of work. You've got to learn and do together. And that unit of value becomes a byproduct. And your focus becomes enhancing your capabilities. At an entity level, let me explain it this way. If you have an Amazon Alexa speaker, they're not trying to sell everybody speakers. They're trying to listen to everybody. They're trying to figure out how to learn more about you. Everything they do is about learning more about you. If you drive a Tesla car, if you're so fortunate to drive a Tesla car, you're funding their R&D, and you're contributing to their understanding of what driving looks like for self-driving cars. So at an individual level, if you take a job just like, oh, I got a job, here's my title, here's my salary, whew. In reality, you've got to look at that job and say, in this current context, it may last 18 to 36 months, so what am I going to learn on this job that I'm going to take somewhere else? So to wrap up, it's all changed now.
It is. So I think the things that we're trying to emphasize here, and frankly, not with a whole lot of answers, right? I think we're in a process of really asking a lot of questions about what this future looks like. And in this point of change, we have to get really comfortable with questions. We've got to get comfortable with being uncomfortable about a future that's not very certain for a lot of people. We think that the one thing that helps us get through this place of discomfort is purpose. When you can really understand your own purpose, your organization's purpose, the culture that creates, that's going to hold the center and make it easier for you to navigate this kind of change. The real killer app, the skill that you will need, is that learning agility, that ability to learn, unlearn, learn new things, to ask new questions and seek out different answers. That breaking of old models, those industrial mental models, and moving to mental models that are appropriate for a more digitalized economy. That's a critical skill. And ultimately, you know, they really need to rethink entirely your organization in terms of how do you create a much more fluid and dynamic workforce able to adapt and change these changing times, this future of work that's going to unfold in front of us.
And the last point we always like to emphasize is when we're talking with organizations that have been through some sort of reduction in force or some reorganization, they tend to charge on just like it was before, where everybody's in some sort of loss or crisis from the change. And we think that going through some sort of process of reorienting everybody towards what's the new vision for the future of work is an important step in the process.
I think the fun point I'd like to make is that we've heard a lot over the last couple of days and great talks about the pace of change, that AI and robots and things are disrupting life as we know it, and that robots are going to take over the world, and we need to live in this different kind of environment where we're going to lose our jobs. I think Sue said something earlier in her talk that was brilliant, which is the work may go away, it's not the same as unemployment, right? Things are going to be different. And while I think we can look at all this change and be frightful and worried and concerned that we're going to be unemployed and unproductive, frankly, this is a period of great opportunity. When this much disruption comes at us, it's the opportunity for us to be our most human and to do our most human capable work, which is to really rethink and reinvent what the future of work might be.
And we call our organization Work to Learn because we believe we used to learn in order to work. Now we're going to have to work in order to learn continuously. That's the sort of punchline on the name of our company. And we love having conversations with people. Our LinkedIn networks are open, so we'll take questions now, I think. But in addition, you can find us online and continue the conversation. So thank you.
Thanks, guys. That was certainly insightful. As a member that will be a full-fledged member of this new way of working, you have to think carefully about the way we think about our careers. So, questions. I think we have some roving mics, or just stand up and let us know where you're from.
Hi, I'm Jane Hawkins from AMP in the technology organisation. How do you unlearn? How do you do that, and how do you do it quickly?
It's a great question. I had it noted.
I haven't unlearned the answer to that.
Yeah. I think it's a process of being able to let go, and it's not easy. And you've got to give people time to do it. It's got to be just like, it's no different than when your Excel gets updated. You've got to give yourself time. It's going to take you more time to do a task when you have to dump the old model that you had for it. There's a bit of a loss in that, so there's a little bit of a mourning process depending on the level of disruption and unlearning, and you have to give people patience to do it.
And I would say, too, as a leader in an organization like AMP or any other corporation, that you really have to keep your sights towards something forward. It's really easy to say, damn this bicycle, I don't need to know how to ride that. The challenge is that there may not be the old style of bicycle on the other side of that learning process. And so, kind of giving yourself permission to be frustrated, to fail, to experience that failure and move on and try again. I think it's important for yourself. It's also important for you as a leader of your organization when you talk to and lead through your people through these changes.
Any other questions? I'll shoot one out there. Oh, sorry, go. Just behind you.
Don Meadows from AMP. When you're talking about learning, I think what comes to my mind is how it needs to be demystified in the workplace and in schools about how your brain actually learns. Mm-hmm. So I think there also needs to be conversation around getting information is not the same thing as actually learning, and how do we take responsibility for our learning, and how do our workplaces and our schools teach everybody how to learn. I'm just wondering if you've got any ideas around that.
Yeah, I think the first thing we've got to do is make that the expectation. I work with higher ed institutions, and we have students coming in who say, I am an X because they declared that major. I don't want to take anything outside of that X. That's setting up the wrong expectation for them for life. Setting up the expectation you're going to continuously learn is a big part of the process. Then once you do that, figure out how different types of people learn and have different modalities of learning, and realizing that learning is taking place all over the place. There are units of learning that you can capture that are not just going to university or going to a class. Failure is part of learning. Failure used to be the thing you avoided. If you avoid it now, you're never changing. If you know the answer before you started, you're not making any change.
I think too, we really do need to, in our organizations, rethink what lifelong learning means. I appreciated the slide that Sue showed with AT&T CEO, our people need to be learning online 5 to 10 hours a week. I mean, that's a lovely ambition. It's great if there's time in the schedule of the day for that to happen. But there are all kinds of ways to learn, right? And so to say in an organization, hey, what are you reading that's not the user manual for the software we just upgraded? Or what are you, what happened in this meeting just now? What did we, when there was that bit of tension, what was that really about? I mean, being able to probe and ask learning questions that allow people to stop and reflect. It's a kind of learning that's important, and yet sometimes in our days we just move so fast that we miss these opportunities that are like little learning nuggets in an effort to go on and do the thing we learned how to do some years ago, right? So I think it's about having a much broader definition of what learning and continual learning means. Hey, Mike,
Craig,
how are you?
It's been a decade. So the question I would like to ask, I think this is terrific, and you mentioned the AT&T guy. When you discuss these concepts, it's a very clear, very compelling framework that you've offered. When you talk to C-suite people who literally are in charge of human capital, what is the source of resistance or excuse to making even marginal cost investments in either A, unlearning, or B, continuing ongoing education? Is it predominantly an economic reason? Is it a cultural reason? What have you found in your interactions with people who've chosen to interact with you?
I think the short answer is yes. We see organizations that are so focused on short-term gain, and we're just going to optimize our way to profitability, and it's the race to zero ultimately, right? I think. We see organizations that say that our workforce development and training budgets are being cut because, by the way, that's going to help us get more profitable this quarter. I think we're also seeing organizations start to recognize that real leadership is making investment in their people in these transformations, and we're seeing conversations about culture happen at very early stages in companies, and you know that I work in the startup ecosystem, right? So I pay a lot of attention to.
But that's cheating.
But is it cheating when, actually, and many of them do it poorly, but is it cheating when those companies are going to be the Fortune or the S&P 500 in 10 years? Mm-hmm. Right? Which is a sign of a warning to larger organizations that don't do this at your peril, because these companies that are starting today are starting and building right. They're building learning, they're building culture, they're building agility into their organizations now. There's no question that this is painful and difficult, and it's going to create moments in the company culture where you just feel uncomfortable, and maybe you're making that decision that this is not the place for me to be anymore, or not all of us are going to be able to go on to this new place. But I think that you make that investment, and you make the investment in being uncomfortable, you stand a much greater chance of getting out of the other side of this. I think of this journey as we're going down this rapid river right now, right? And some of us learned how to deal with category 1, 2, 3 rapids when we were going through whatever management training experience we had. These rapids are coming at us, and they're category 6, and nobody has ever navigated them. Some people are going to crash on the rocks and never make it, some organizations. Some are going to, by luck, get through there, and they're going to limp along on the other side, and maybe they'll be able to rebuild. And I think those people who embrace that this is going to be difficult and challenging and nothing we've ever experienced, and so we've got to be open to that, they're going to shoot through those rapids and be in a much better place to take advantage of the new future.
That's great. Will, Bang on 0 seconds left, so thank you, Chris and Heather. You can continue the conversation with them on LinkedIn or Twitter. They're very active. SAP will be demonstrating their product in the lobby. Thank you.